Bonsoir. Bonsoir à toutes et à tous.
Good evening to all.
Donc bonsoir, c'est donc moi qui ai la...
Good evening. I am lucky enough to be the moderator of this panel. I'm Tania Zaspinar, sorry. We will be, first of all, asking a few questions to Lisa Gerig, the producer of the film, who's at my side. Then we'll move on to some guests, a panel made up of protagonists of the film, a representative of the SM, and representatives of some associations. I'll ask them questions, and then we'll hand over to you so that you can ask your questions, dear members of the public, of the audience. Let's take a seat.
Je me fais servir, merci beaucoup. Donc Lisa, merci.
Lisa, thank you for joining us this evening. Congratulations on your film. How are you doing? Has it been a bit crazy since the first viewing? Well, I'm delighted because there's a lot of interest in it. Initially, I was quite surprised. When we launched the project, I often heard people saying, no, we can't make a film on that topic. Everybody's sick to death with it, but you can't be tired and sick to death of something that you're responsible for. So the idea here was for you to show us something that we never have access to here with people who were really experiencing these situations. How did you go about convincing the various asylum seekers, but also members of the SEM to take part in this project? Well, it was actually harder to gain access to the staff members of the SEM. I've been working on migration for years now. I visited many prisons where people are sent back, and I'd already got a fairly good relationship with a couple of the protagonists of the film, so I had quite easy access to them. We took time to get to know each other. We talked a lot. As for the SEM people, I didn't want to launch straight into communicating with them. I wanted to hear the stories not directly from those who would be in the film. So I got in touch with people who were working there, but not going to be in the film. I contacted retirees, people who'd worked there beforehand but no longer were there. I got in touch with one young chap who works there, and I set up a kind of network. It turns out that some aspects of the asylum seekers' lives were difficult to talk about. How did you go about working with the protagonists on these very sensitive experiences? Well, it was important for me to know that the protagonists knew exactly where we were heading, what we wanted to do, and I needed to ensure that their mental health was quite stable, because what we were asking of them wasn't easy. We talked a lot. I think that was crucial. I needed to set up trust. I talked with psychologists about trauma, how it works, what needed to be avoided, and the protagonists knew that at any point in time they could say, I don't want to do this anymore, or I need to have a break. And there were some aspects of their story that we agreed we wouldn't broach with them because it was just going to be too hard. At what point in time did you decide to switch the roles around sort of halfway through the film when it's the asylum seekers themselves who ask the questions? Well, when we were doing the research, we filmed a few of the sessions and just to practice. And then I would always ask at the end, if you were to be able to choose one of the roles, which one would it be? And it was quite surprising because the reaction was one that gave them a sense of freedom. They got the impression that they no longer had to be the asylum seeker. They felt changed. And so we felt that it was important to include that in the film. And it was also useful to see how power works. In preparing the film, did you wonder about the potential impact of the involvement of these protagonists in the film? So the impact on the procedures which were still underway. Yes, I spoke with the lawyers of the various protagonists to see if there might be a risk. I didn't want there to be any. And the lawyer explained that it wouldn't be the case, and that to the contrary, it might be beneficial in their cases if the film was a success. What led you to becoming so interested in asylum procedures? What led you to wanting to delve into this ultimately relatively opaque world? Well, I think it's because people I love, people I care about, friends were involved in such hearings and shared with me how difficult it was. It's a system that is violent, that shakes people up. And so I felt affected and I felt responsible in a way. It's a Swiss system. We are able to act politically, and so I became interested in it, and the more I saw, the more I became radicalized in a certain way. And how did you go about finding out more about the system? Did you do a lot of research? Did you do research over several years? Well, I was able to speak with a lot of people. It was important for me. I had to dare make the film. It was quite a complex topic. The debate on asylum is a heated debate. People always have an opinion, and a very strong one. And for me, it was important to know what was at stake and what was being talked about. And so I did a whole host of interviews, some 30-odd interviews, to know exactly what I was talking about. Yes, it is a heated debate. Is that why you chose to use a very sort of soft and simple approach and context and surroundings? Well, yes, we wanted to find a very sober building, and we were very lucky to find that building where we could film. It's made of cement. It's quite bare. It has these long corridors, which are aesthetically pleasing. And we walked around the building with the protagonists, and we asked them, do you feel that it's an adequate building? And everybody agreed that it was. The personal situations that are shown and that are that the film is based on, you explained that you spoke with a lot of people, be it staff members of SCM and asylum seekers. Do you feel that what was shown in the film is representative of what happens on a daily basis at the SCM? I think that the 4 hearings you saw are a little softer than what usually happens. The 4 people asking questions were the only 4 who accepted to be filmed. So they are extremely brave people who knew that they may be criticized. They didn't fear showing their faces, and I feel that in reality, the interviews and the hearings are often much harsher and much faster. The questions are fired very quickly at the seekers, so I do believe the film is quite soft. As for the refusal of the request when you discovered that their applications had been turned down, how did you feel? When I started working on asylum procedures, I was mainly in touch with people whose applications had been turned down because they need the support. Okay, and what was the feedback from the SEM staff? You can tell, especially in the second part and the latter part of the film, that they feel quite uncomfortable. The film was shown, people have watched it. What's the feedback that you've had? Well, I was happy to see that the 8 protagonists proud of having been in it. One of the interviewers said that at the point in time when the roles were exchanged, it was actually the hardest thing she'd had to do. I found that quite surprising. But it was important to me that the protagonists all saw the film before it was shown in public, and they all approved of it. Were you closely monitored by the SEM, or were you entirely free to do what you wanted once you'd got approval? We were quite free. They came to see us filming on one day, and we showed them the film before it was made public. But luckily, there was nothing we had to change or decided to change for the SEM, because I wouldn't have wanted to do that. The film has already received awards. It's already out in cinema in German-speaking Switzerland. It's soon going to be shown in the cinemas in French-speaking Switzerland. What impact are you expecting? I feel that it's maybe the starting point for a different debate. A debate, I'm looking for the right term, a debate in which everybody knows exactly what's being talked about. I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that we're talking about human beings. I think that is the main problem. Often people, when they're talking about migration, forget. I think that we're talking about human beings. And with this film, I hope that people will start to see things differently. Certainly, it will be an addition to the whole asylum debate. Congratulations, that being said, on your film. A big round of applause for you. Thank you so much.
Et maintenant, du coup, on va passer au panel avec...
And without further ado, let's move on to the panel discussion. So, how do we go about it? Do you join me on stage, and do I introduce you as you join me, or? Hello, good evening. Pascal or Nana? Good evening, Pascal. Guillaume Bégert, Raphaël Ray, Maurizio Miceli, and Living Small Video. They deserve a round of applause. Good evening, one and all. Living Smile video, good evening. You will be able to follow us in your headset. You asked me to call you Smiley, so I'm going to call you Smiley. You're in the film, but you're also an actress and an activist. You are a pioneer of trans activism in India. You have acted in plays and films, and you're becoming famous in Switzerland, so welcome. Pascal Onana, you're also in the film. You are a Cameroonian activist. You came to Switzerland for a conference and you never managed to get back home. Now you work in Winterthur. You are a teacher of German, and you also work on asylum issues. We have Maurizio Miceli with us as well. Good evening. So you are in charge of you're the director of Asile Suisse Romande at the SEM. So you work on asylum issues for the Swiss Confederation, I think from 1998. And Guillaume Bégert, good evening. You're in charge of legal coordination for asylum seekers at Caritas Switzerland. So you've worked in that field for about 10 years. And Raphaël Rennes, sitting next to you, you're in charge of information at the Geneva CSP Refugee Service. And you coordinated research in the field of anthropology in the on the field of verisimilitude in asylum seeking. So what I suggest that we do is that we go over the whole process of asylum seeking in 3 parts. We will first focus on verisimilitude, and then we will look at what is being done in terms of asylum in Switzerland, and then we will look at the system as a whole. But Smiley, without further ado, let's start with you. At the end of the film, we've seen that there's a summary of your respective situations, but we don't know what happened to you. So if you agree, maybe you can tell us what has happened to you and what led you to accept to be filmed in this movie.
Just a little update. There is no update. I'm still the same waiting, hanging somewhere in the air. Yeah, that's the thing. And what was the second question, bitte?
Pourquoi vous avez accepté de participer?
What made you accept this role in the film?
Because I am somebody who have the tendency to speak, to tell our stories, to continue the fight. So every time when I get an opportunity to talk about the struggles, to tell the stories, I would only take it as an yes. And also, I previously heard if I understood correctly, when you're talking with Lisa, you're talking about risk. And also for me, I want to also reflect on that. Can I? Thank you. So the thing is, for asylum seekers like us, it can be a risk, but actually I don't think we have any new risk, because since we already in risk, our life is already at stake. And for me, when I come from India, I had to go through a risk of living alive because of the fighting spirit and for questioning the system. Now I'm here seeking asylum, but then I'm still in a nowhere kind of a space. So there's nothing to lose anymore. It's just life is anyway at risk. Anytime I can get a negative, I can be deported, I can be killed, whatever can happen. At least if that's happening, before that, every opportunity when I get, we can make our voice heard. And this film made this great opportunity to have a conversation, have an open conversation among the Swiss citizens. And that's the risk worth to take, I think. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Pascal and Anna, let me ask you the same question. What is your situation now, and what made you accept being in this film? Thank you once again. Good evening, one and all. I did accept to appear in a film. It was very difficult for me to relive this very traumatic experience. I watched the film once and I will not watch it twice. I do not have the strength, not the desire to do so. Lisa, the director, contacted me for the film, and I think I said no 4 or 5 times because it is difficult to go through such difficult moments. It's very difficult. But then I asked myself the right questions, and I stopped thinking only about myself. I know that the question asylum seeking is a burning question, and unfortunately, with the procedure being as it is today, it is a danger. It puts everyone at risk, not just asylum seekers, but the whole society. So I thought, I'll sacrifice myself, if it comes to that, to the cause, to show the world what it looks like from the inside, what happens during the hearings, with the hope of raising awareness and share my own thoughts, if possible. As I told the team, for me it's too late, but I wouldn't want this situation to keep going on, because people who get traumatized and they are released in society and anything can happen. So you asked about my situation. Well, it's still pending and I'm still waiting. Maurizio Miceli, the State Secretariat for Migration, also accepted to play their own role in the film, because those are real employees that we saw in the film. I think you did a screening of the film for your teams. What can you tell us about their reactions? Good evening. Well, we showed the film twice in Gerig, and, well, it's true that it is difficult for our colleagues who work on asylum-seeking procedures to be shown in such a raw manner. They could have felt naked. They could have had 2 different feelings to the showing of the film. They could feel that it's like a caricature, or, which is a natural reaction to it, or, well, it can lead to questioning what we do. And sometimes, well, some employees have the 2 at the same time, in some moments in the film it feels like a caricature, but at other points in the film, it leads to them questioning what they do. I like to think of myself to be quite an open person, open-minded. I did about 2,000 hearings before I moved on to becoming a director, and I do hope that I showed empathy and I tried as best as I could to understand people's situation, even if during those hearings, when you're there in the hearing, you embody the authority. So we have power, and when you have power, you need to show respect to the people in front of you, and you need to show respect to your employer and society at large. Interesting. Well, we can further look into this question of making a decision. Raphaël, maybe you can tell us more about it, because not everybody knows about this procedure. The hearing is the key moment of the whole process, right? And could you tell us what happens before and what happens after, in a few words? Well, that's going to be very few words because there's a lot happening before and a lot happening after. But the hearing is the crux of the matter. It's the very heart of the asylum-seeking procedure. So we're going to look at the grounds for asylum and see if they are receivable. But you have to understand that before getting there, the asylum seeker has gone through quite a number of steps. The first one is, well, they go into exile. You know, it's a very difficult path. You don't arrive here in Europe just to seek asylum. It's a whole journey. And then there's a whole lot of obstacles, procedural obstacles that come up. You know, you need to go and show that you haven't gone through another European state, that you have not received protection in another safe country, that you're not coming from another country that we consider to be safe. There's a lot of questions that are already being asked before the asylum seeker gets to the hearing. So during the hearing, there are questions, some that take more time, and for the long hearing, everything is recorded. That's what we see in the film, and that document then goes through the hands of quite a number of people before a decision is made. Guillaume Bégert, with the reform of the law on asylum, you now have a new role. This reform was voted in 2016, the objective being to accelerate the whole procedure. That was the objective given by the proponents of the law that came into force in 2019. And as we saw in the film, Pascal, Smiley, your hearings happened before the reform. So there was someone sitting next to you who doesn't say anything. So that was you before, and you now, you work as a legal advisor. So what has changed? What is your role now? Do you talk more during the hearings? Good evening. Well, it depends, I'd say. And as Raphaël Rey explained earlier, everything that happens before the hearing is essential for the hearing to go smoothly. So in that context, our role as legal counsel, legal protection, which is a new role that follows the reform, 2019 reform, our role is to accompany asylum seekers all the way until the hearing. And concretely, that means that we carry out consultations. So asylum seekers come to our center and they will meet us. We explain to them what we do, what Caritas Switzerland does, the fact that we are there for them to help them prepare the next steps in the procedure. It's also a way to inform them of things that concern them, or maybe their grounds for seeking asylum. And then, because the procedure goes quite quickly, and the second step is we give them support to prepare for the hearing, and we try to explain as well as we can what is the hearing, what questions are going to be asked, what are the authorities looking for, what is our role as legal counsel. I think Lisa Gerig said that she got some feedback about the fact that the hearings atmosphere was quite peaceful in the film. It's true, it's also what I felt watching the film, because sometimes there are hearings where the atmosphere is much more tense. There's much more tension between the asylum seekers and the legal counsel and the person holding the hearing. So you're like a lawyer, so to speak. A bit like that, yes, but we are specialized in hearings, so there's the specificity, which is that we will not be able to answer questions. If the asylum seeker has questions, we can only interject and help them express themselves. Smiley, in the film, you were saying that you can't be ready for such an experience in your life. Would you have liked to be better prepared? Would you have liked to have someone to support you? Would that have made things easier?
Yeah. So before the actual audition happened, I was informed that I can just tell, because I had a discussion with my lawyer and she knows the whole story, she knows what happened, and then she said it's a strong value to ask asylum, so just tell whatever the questions been asked, just answer everything openly. And then also I was only warned that the interviewer won't show any emotion. They were like supposed to be just neutral as much as possible. So don't get distracted. Don't think that they're not empathetic. They're not listening. They're not whispering anything. Just whatever questions been asked, answer your question, and then it will be fine. So that's the thing that I was prepared. Like, okay, I have a genuine case, so I will just answer. Okay, you ask question, I give answer, and then give me the seal, and okay, bye. Like that I was expecting. But then turns out it's psychologically it's a different journey that you have to all the way from the beginning to go through, from your childhood to from the traumas to from the attacks, and then this thing and whatever you did and how it made you feel. And then I was also as much possibly composed to tell my story, but I would have like really appreciate if there is a psychological support that was given before, or like if there is some guidelines, because I'm not trying to blame here, so please take it in the best possible way when I say this, that in the first time when I was interviewed, I didn't get a chance to explain, saying, oh, you have the second interview where you can elaborate these things. But then when it comes to the second interview, there were moments where I've been told like, oh no, you talked about this already in the first, like that. So these are some kind of a technically how to deal this situation, how to be fight, like don't let anything, just tell what you already have to tell, like some kind of tips and advice was given would be nice. And also I know that they would be like neutral, but I didn't know that how do I answer while you go through the trauma again, how you handle it. If I had some kind of that kind of a psychological support was given or after the thing, because the whole thing, it's like you get so nervous, and it's not actually, it is not an audition. For me, it's more like a interrogation. It was more like, okay, you said something, now prove me that you are a victim, and then I was more pressured that it's not about just telling what happened, then more than it's like it happened and it is true. I have this even more pressure to tell that. So if I had some opportunity how to handle that kind of a pressure, and if I had a chance to also stay strong and be more clear, I mean, being alive, surviving is one thing, but then to go through all the thing all over again, and then like even make for this film also we have to take this, but this is for a good cause, I get it, and that is for my personal good cause, I get it, but then it's really hard to explain, man. Like, just to how do you prove that you need a safety, you need a rescue and asylum? It just, yeah. I wish I had some kind of a support system and some kind of a preparation for that, in that matter. Yeah, I would appreciate if I have something like that. Thank you.
Maurizio Miceli.
Maurizio Miceli. Smiley is asking the question. How can we prove that what we're telling is true? Verisimilitude is what motivates the decision of the CN, but what do you base yourselves on to decide that people are telling the truth? Well, we're not talking about life stories, we're talking about grounds for asylum. That's the first thing, that's very important. So our role is to decide whether or not a person will be recognized as a refugee in Switzerland or not, because it's very important, because otherwise things are blurry. Our service needs to pronounce itself on whether or not a person qualifies for the status of asylum seeker, for asylum. So in the film I heard a number of times the terms truth, foreigners, that's important, but verisimilitude, that's a legal concept. Law is not hard science, it's part of humanities. So the time comes when we are faced with grounds for asylum, and we have to look into them and see if they are credible. So there is Article 3 of the law on asylum on this very point, and my former colleague, Damien Cornu, came up with an example that made a lot of people laugh when he was asked, do you remember what you said in your first job interview at CN? So he couldn't say who did his interview, but he could give us a very interesting detail, which was that he was in his bathtub when his future employer called him to offer the job. So that very detail gives verisimilitude to the story. It can be a detail, it can be testimonies, it can be evidence. You know, there's no verisimilitude checklist that we have on our desks where we just tick boxes and then in the end we say, oh, fantastic, so they ticked all the boxes, they can get asylum. No, we have to look at the whole picture. If someone tells us, I used to lead a political party, then we can expect the person to give us a lot of details about their political party. But if it's someone with a level of education, a much lower level of education, then we have to look at what they're saying in the light of their level of education. So this is not hard science. It's many factors that need to be looked at. Isn't there a paradox between the fact that we ask asylum seekers to prove almost scientifically their grounds for seeking asylum, and then there's a level of subjectivity when you examine the criteria? Well, that's a matter of law. The law is not hard science. You can ask a question and get different answers. Well, that's a lawyer's answer, right? Smiley, you wanted to react?
Yeah. Basically, with respect, when you said, I understand when you say we're not looking for the life story of someone, but the ground to accept it as a case. I respect that. I hear that. I'm aware of that. But the thing is, Beispiel, I'm not sure if the interviewer is culturally well informed about what which country I come from. So there was this certain point when they asked me why you didn't go to the police, why you didn't ask help in the police or like court or law. But it is hard for me to explain them that you seeing a trans person in Europe is different from in India, where we are the more vulnerable. When I say someone attacked me for being naked on stage, and I go and tell this the police say that I was naked on the stage, then I will be I have to face consequence again with the police when they say, oh, you are a trans, you're a woman, why would you be naked? And then they go deep into questions like what you have down under, like they will talk about my personal gender dysphoria. They will ask me, and then they will blame me, and then they will, whatever the thugs, whatever the right wings, these people trying to do, they will do it even more authentically. They will do it with more legal this thing. And there is like India, trans women or even Dalit or mostly the vulnerable community women, they don't dare to go to police or to judges, because if you, I know here you don't receive a lot of news from India, but women being stripped and took in the streets naked for kilometers and gang raped, and then there is no consequence. There have been women who've been raped by 17 men and killed a 7-year-old child, taking her leg and throw it in the wall, and these people court let them walk away free. That kind of a country we live in, and as just we're like least considered as human person, and we cannot just go and ask. And how do I even explain this? So if you're not culturally informed in these things, or if you're not going to listen, how can I prove that I can't go to a police and tell these things? Like, because you know that here you can go, you can tell, you can seek. It is not how it works in India. It's not how it works in Afghanistan. It's not how it works in Iran or Iraq. So, and I understood, in my understanding, if it is right, that I'll tell you everything and you can double check, cross check in India where this person is real, this is the same identity. If something similar happened or something, if you do that, this is how I was, maybe I was wrong, but that's what I hope. So maybe whatever that I cannot prove, that they can seek and find out. And then if they say you are lying, if you have a concrete reason that to tell me that if you're lying, I could at least respectfully take that or try to fight again. But when they say just, you are young, you speak English, you are fine, I mean, come on, there is no rapist going to come and rape me. And I say like, hey, no, don't rape me. Oh, you speak English, okay, how can I rape you anymore? How can I kill you anymore? He don't go like that. He just shot me and raped me and tried to kill me. As simple as that. He don't care what my age I am, he don't care what language I speak. That kind of a country we live, being a trans person. So that's something I would really appreciate. It is also important when you ask me how we can be prepared. I think I would appreciate if the interviewer also prepared a little more culturally what kind of person we are doing. I do, though, they did some research, they know about my autobiography, they talked about this, but then I don't know. Please understand, my intention is not to blame them, but my intention is to request them. And don't take it personally, it is never a blame game. It is more about like, try more, give us more opportunity, give us more respect, give us more space, is all I'm asking. Thank you. Thanks a lot for it.
Maurizio Miceli, je vous laisserai répondre.
Maurizio, I'll let you answer, but I'd just like to know whether you would like to react to what Smiley said, or whether you wanted to react to something else. No, it was to what was said before, but I think the answer was quite clear. Maurizio, what do you have to say about that? About what exactly? Well, about the preparation, getting prepared for local specificities. Do staff members at the SEM work for a specific region? Are they very familiar with a given region, or do they do all interviews? And then as to the situation, the specific situation of the person, are they trained and informed of the person's specific situation? And is the level of trauma and traumatism taken into account when the interview takes place? Now, are they specialized? Well, they become specialized through experience and especially thanks to the profile of people who turn up. If half of the asylum seekers come from country X, obviously everybody will have to start carrying out interviews for that country. The context becomes more familiar. There are two priority regions, Turkey and Afghanistan, and all of the staff members become experts, so to speak, in these countries. Then you have applications from countries that are less frequent, so to speak, and you discover the country with the person who's seeking asylum, and that seems quite natural to me. And then there's the documentation service that assists us in finding information about the country. The person's life story, well, as my colleague Guillaume was saying earlier on, before the hearing on the grounds, there is a procedure, an information procedure that is carried out in the context of the hearing preparation. If there is relevant information for a hearing, we are informed of it. It is the legal protection that inform us. So there is a transfer of information that takes place, and it takes place well. We receive information. Be careful, such and such a person is particularly sensitive about such and such a thing. Any information that may be useful for the hearing, persecutions related to gender have to be notified. We can't know whether an individual is traumatized or not on the day of the hearing, but if we were to see that the person is in such a bad state that the hearing cannot take place on that day, well, then we either decide to have a break or we decide to postpone the hearing to another day so that they can recover. Now, in relation to the film, and based on our daily experience, I think that we show a little bit more empathy. This represents the former procedure, asylum procedure. Nowadays, when there's a break in the interview, the asylum seeker rarely stays on their own. The interpreter may stay in the room, or another staff member will stay in the room, so there is a little more empathy shown than what was shown in the film. Well, thank goodness, says a member of the audience. Now, the reform was criticized at length back then by the CSP and Caritas. Is there support better than it was? Has it improved, according to you? Well, Caritas supported the reform because there was legal protection. We were looking at accelerating the procedures significantly, and there was legal protection to be set up. Now, to come back to what was said earlier, does this legal protection allow for an improvement of the system? I think partially yes, partially as regards the pre-hearing, the first steps of the procedure, and understanding how the procedure takes place, what is expected, being able to look at evidence. Sometimes the mere presence of a legal representative Some of the asylum seekers told me afterwards that my presence during the hearing, well, you can't deny it. The hearing is always a trial for the person concerned. I think you could see that quite clearly in the film. But then what's important is information and the way in which the hearing takes place. And then there's all the rest. What situation is the person in when they turn up? What's the personal situation of the person? What's their age, their life story, their health situation? And in this accelerated procedure, there is still a certain number of situations, even though there is an improvement in terms of implementation, but there still are situations in which the person turns up for the hearing, and unfortunately, and this was mentioned in the film, we don't know what their health is like. We don't know to what extent the hearing will be traumatizing, because it often is at different degrees, and we don't know to what point their health will have an impact on their ability to meet the expectations of the authorities, in particular in terms of plausibility. And I'd just like to mention the fact that all of these elements are absolutely fundamental. Studies show that 50 to 60%, even perhaps more, are suffering from PTSD when they turn up in Switzerland, as Raphael mentioned earlier on. Post-traumatic stress disorder, that is. Right, so coming to this point in time where you have to prove the plausibility of what you're saying. The expectations run high with regards to the asylum seeker. Well, what I have to say is that you need an asylum procedure, obviously. You need an interview, a hearing, obviously. We're not challenging that. But what I challenge is how. What I'd like to say is that what you saw tonight, is a hearing. But what we experience most of the time is a questioning. It's an interrogation, and that has to change. Many times you have people who are in a situation of emergency, of extreme need. You said that sometimes we're traumatized to different degrees, and you don't know to what extent the asylum seeker that you're facing is traumatized. Well, that's a problem. Because if you don't know to what extent they're traumatized, how on earth can you carry out an interview? And during the hearing, well, it's good that there are lawyers who inform you ahead of time as to the rights and the law. That's really important. It's really important that there is a trustworthy person during the hearing. That's great. That's a step forwards, and it deserves to be mentioned. But there is a big difference between a psychologist and a legal expert. The legal expert will not be able to understand a person who is traumatized. He may feel empathy, and thank goodness. But how do you understand somebody's traumatisms during the interview? How do you know that the person is in an extreme situation, an emergency situation? Or somebody who's never broken down before, and then they suddenly broke down during the interview. This happened to me, and the interviewer didn't even know what to do. And you can't count on the interpreters to play the role of a psychologist. That would be ridiculous. And then what happens at the end of the interview? Once all the questions have been answered and you've been traumatized again, then what happens? What's to be done? Well, you get told, thank you for your cooperation, you may go home. How do you go home? Tell me how you go home. After my interview, which started at 9 and ended at 6 p.m., I was told, you may go home. I waited 2 hours in Bern. I waited 2 hours. I didn't know where I was. I needed 2 hours to find where I was, to understand where I had to go, where the tram stop was. And then what next, once you go back to the camp? How do you deal with it? How do you deal with the situation in society? Now, once again, I'm not against interviews. They're needed. Interviews are a way, one of the ways of getting to the truth, but it's not the only way. And sometimes an awful lot of pressure is placed on the interview, and if you don't get the right answers, then all is lost. At the beginning of the interview, your rights are read out. They're not rights, they're obligations, duties. You're told that you have the right to cooperate. You have to say only the truth. You may decide not to answer some questions, but if you don't, it may have consequences on the rest of the procedure. So then what? What do you do? So the hearing starts out and you're stressed before it's even begun. You know that you're going to be asked questions, and sometimes you can't answer, you don't want to answer, you're not prepared. So then what? Raphaël Rey, you wanted to react? No, yes, I did. We spoke of the power relations during the hearing, and I wanted to come back to that. The goal of the hearing is to take a decision. You need to be able to place different life events and elements in legal boxes, and this is a violent process. Law is not an exact science, and I feel like saying thank goodness. Thank goodness it isn't, but there is this duty which is to place lives in boxes. And at the end of the day, it's an institution that's going to decide what is going to be held against the person, what contradictions, what micro details that don't match what was said previously. And this is where the violence takes place, in my view, the violence in the hearing, the uncertainty with regard to what this person's saying, but a legal uncertainty, because at the end of the day, at a certain point in time, you have to make a decision, and that's where the violence comes in. Also, if the SEM staff member can and must make the decision, the power relation doesn't only exist during the hearing. Yes, they make a decision, but then there is the state behind them to ensure that the decision is implemented, and the asylum seeker doesn't have any of that. So it's not only a matter of showing empathy during the hearing. The situation is not necessarily going to change because of empathy, and thank goodness the staff members do show empathy. But we're facing something that is common, that is systemic, and we're all aware of the fact, the studies I've done, but others too, point to the fact that SEM staff members can be gentler or harsher, but they do need to be able to identify lies. You referred to research. Which research exactly are you referring to? The study by Laura Folter, Euphrine Portner, who questioned people from the SEM and who've written articles over the last 2 years with the cooperation of staff members. And according to some staff members, it is easier to justify a negative decision on the basis of a lack of plausibility. That's been mentioned by staff members. It's also been shown that by looking for micro details and details in people's life stories, people, and you mentioned this in the film, you're asked how many people were present at this point in time. Then the person says, do I have to answer? And then they end up saying a figure that's possibly not the same one that was given 6 months prior, and then you're criticized for that during the hearing. We carry out our work in the field, and we see many cases where people's word, and they may get the impression that the hearing went well, but what they say is held against them afterwards. They're told that they didn't give enough details for X, or too many details for Y, or having contradicted themselves on this or that point. And these are things that we see quite regularly. And I'm saying this not only because we see it, but because there have been legal studies carried out. You want names? I can give them to you afterwards. But what I'm trying to say here is that there are documented cases and there are reports on this matter, and we know that the assessment of plausibility is restrictive. And when you look at asylum procedures, it's not only plausibility during the hearings. You're looking at the grounds, and the approach is restrictive, and we see it in the decisions. Yes, there's plausibility, but there's also an analysis, an assessment of what's happening in the country of origin that is quite restrictive. You may believe the person, but they end up with a rejection. And we saw rejections in the film, and I'm not too sure it had to do with plausibility. Would you like to answer, Mr. Michel? Well, it's a little difficult for me to answer that. It's difficult for me to understand how in Switzerland we have 50% protection. I think this shows that the system that wanted to accelerate the procedure doesn't only give negative decisions, but positive ones too. When I look at the protection rate, since the introduction of the new asylum procedure, I think this protection rate is quite high. But this culture of suspicion, as was underscored earlier on, maybe a lack of training in psychology by SEM staff members. How can we introduce that training in this very legal environment of hearings? Well, thankfully, there are not only legal experts who work at the SEM. What is the training of the people who work there? Maybe political science, law, literature. You can have people from all walks of life. Thankfully, the right of asylum and asylum law is not a field in which you necessarily have to be a legal expert. It's a field in which the profiles of people working in it can be quite diverse. It's not only a matter of reading the federal constitution. People have different experiences in the field, and the colleagues, the ones that I saw in the film, have explained this when talking about their own personal lives. And Guillaume, this brings us to mental health that we've been talking about for a little while now. They take it into account at the time of the hearing. In the news, you often hear about the lack of follow-up after the procedure. with people being left to their own devices. So we saw it recently with the hostage-taking near Yverdon a few weeks ago. Is this a void in the Swiss system? Is it the legal experts that need to fill that void? What's the situation? No, it's not up to us to fill the gap. We try to highlight different situations. We mention them to the authorities, and we want the medical support to be provided. What is clear is that the length of the procedure is sometimes in conflict with the medical urgency. Sometimes you need 1 month, and you need to know whether in that month the person has gone to the infirmary, and if they went to the medical center, has an appointment been made with a GP, and if an appointment was made with the GP, was that person then referred on to a psychologist or a psychiatrist? You need time for all this to happen, and we know that the medical system in Switzerland is under pressure, and yes, on paper, there is equal access to health care, but we know that in reality, asylum seekers will find it much more difficult to have access to care, depending on what their issue is, but because especially they depend on people referring them to a given expert. Also, access to mental health care is not easy when we know that more than half of asylum seekers turn up with PTSD. Now, there is the extended procedure if the state needs more information. In reality, we know that it is quite difficult to know exactly what the health situation is ahead of the hearing. Smiley, did you want to say something?
I want to agree what they said, and it's not only difficult, but most of us, I'm talking mostly for queer for this question, that most of us queers or trans, we don't even know that we have the right to ask for it in the first place. That a lot of the people that from my community, I've seen many people in the same asylum center that I lived, that they were struggling psychologically and they didn't know that they can ask. I was informing them to ask for it, and then it was in the beginning. See, there's two things. For where I come from, here the medical system, the medical support is it's like amazing. I'm so thankful. Really, I mean it. But to get the access was a little bit hard, a little bit not easy at the beginning. But when you get it, then you get it. You will be taken care, all that. That goes well. But I needed to know that I can ask for help. I can get the help. And zum Beispiel, I was every time it is like when I'm in an extreme condition that I cannot take it anymore, when I have to outburst, that's when you actually get that thing, the support or anything. But otherwise, if you're struggling, that most of the people, especially queer, when you're struggling, you have to struggle in your own dark space. You don't have someone to share that, okay, I'm going through something, I think I need a help, because I'm not sorry, but the world is mostly cis-hetero. It's the most cis-hetero world we live in, and that is no exception for asylum centrum also. Everything is so much into cis and hetero perspective, and we are not. I never felt welcomed or never felt safe space in any kind of asylum centrum or the other parts of it. It was just I happen to be someone who is more vocal, so I can just ask for it and I fight for it, but not a lot of us are so vocal. Not many of us are really brave, because we come from that kind of a condition that we cannot speak. Speaking is putting you in more danger, so you don't dare to speak. In that case, as an asylum system, I would really like to have a hand, like, hey, do you have any problem? We can help you. That affirmation can change a lot, and not many people know that options, that you can fight, you can ask for health support. You are just suffering alone. That is kind of happening, so I want to add that.